if you want a copy of it, I can send it to you. And as now has become, standard, well, if you think I want to share this with the world, then we'll share it with the world. But why don't you begin by telling me a little bit about yourself?
Okay, yes, I'll just start from the beginning. So yeah, I'm Trevor West. I'm a current senior undergraduate student at Seton Hall University, doing 3 majors: international relations and diplomacy, modern languages, which includes Chinese and Japanese, and also philosophy. But people often think like that's a lot because it's a triple major, but the first 2 kind of correspond because there's like a language requirement already in international relations, so that already covers most of that in the Chinese Japanese. And then I'm in the honors program here, so the philosophy is basically I can get a philosophy major, but it's basically a glorified minor. So it's basically the same minor requirements, just about a little bit more. So it's basically a major and a half or 2. So it's not as crazy as people usually think it.
It sounds nuts.
Yeah.
How's the weather in New Jersey? My old home.
Oh, it's been kind of rainy here recently. It's starting to get cold finally.
Yeah.
The winter is coming. So
yeah. Live out here in California, the land of summer.
Oh yeah. I have 2 brothers who live there actually, right in LA. So.
Oh, wonderful. Well, I'm in Northern California, so we don't have as good a weather as they have, but
okay.
I'll take it. So what's on your mind? What do you want to talk about?
Well, I just listened actually to I listened to a lot of your things on like your podcast form, because often I'm like moving around and stuff, but I think it's called the Smuggling, Cheap Life, Robbing Philosophy's Education. And a lot with like C.S. Lewis. So it's like, I don't know, I found that's interesting. Obviously you've been doing a lot of commentary on like Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris. So I guess maybe starting with them, just have a conversation about that, because I find your views very interesting and elucidating as like an interesting third perspective, as sort of like an intermediary between, I guess, Peterson and Harris. And
I'm amazed you have time. I mean, good grief.
Yeah, no, recently it's been pretty busy, so I haven't been able to listen to everything. But
I don't expect anybody to listen to everything, because it's a lot of time. So, So what do you think?
My current views on like Peterson. Okay, so it seems to be that I don't know. It seems like, I guess in like the Harrison Peterson debates, I guess Harris is kind of missing the point that Peterson's bringing to the table. In talking about meaning and kind of like, well, just in that recent thing I listened from you, I don't know if that was from C.S. Lewis, but sort of like how we're always in like a paradigm, and obviously there's like Thomas Kuhn, and sort of like we're always coming into something with a given framework, and if it's not explicit, then it's implicit. So I think it's interesting right now, because it seems like the current framework that I think we all have a lot of experience with, even with like using this online communication and stuff, is like a sort of materialism. So it's like a materialist framework. And I don't know if it was Kuhn, but I heard that, or maybe it was even Karl Marx. He was saying that the sort of the material framework that we have to work with, like the materials that we live with, kind of help frame our perspective on things. So I was thinking about that, like how the human brain is usually compared to like a computer.
Yeah.
But obviously before the computer,
right.
So it's like we're always grappling with what we have to make sense of things. So in that sense, I'm pretty much fully in agreement with Jordan Peterson. And then with I think like what Peterson was saying, like Sam Harris's goal to try and get a better version of morality, or at least whatever, it's a noble intention, but I don't know, it runs into obviously a lot of problems in knowing like what is right and whatnot. And
well, you'll be interested in the video I just put out today on I just made it today and I can't think of what it is. Maybe it's early onset Alzheimer's. It's Alistair McGrath, and he was going through a number of atheists in terms of this question, because it's a fascinating question to hear Brett Weinstein and Sam Harris kind of critique evolution, let's say implicit morality within evolution, or implicit chimp morality. Okay, where are you getting your standard to critique those things? Because obviously you have one.
Yeah. I think, isn't that the problem of infinite regress? It's just you're always like the turtles all the way down. It's like no matter what, it's like you're always in a framework. Like,
That's
so
right. That's right. That's right.
yeah.
And often I hear people thinking like, well, I left the church and so now I'm out there without a framework. And it's like, no, no, no,
Yeah.
you're just in another one. And
Yeah.
remember the movie's Matrix, he kind of leaves he's just always in the
Yeah.
framework. And
Yeah.
because we can't live outside of a framework. We just
Hmm.
can't function.
Yeah, we go crazy. Well, if
Yeah.
anything, that's actually what madness might be, because it's like people who are so disoriented that the world is just so much where even like sitting in a room, you start going crazy. Because I mean, it's almost like with categorizing things, like I think because I've been reading Peterson's Maps of Meaning, so I'm like a little around 2/3 through it, but he talked a lot about, and it wasn't him, other people have as well, but basically that what is it, something that's normal or considered normal is like emotionally neutral, so then we can ignore it, because like if it's safe, then it just disappears from view. And that's why you could say, like in the news, they usually focus on negative things, death, murder, all these things, because that's the thing that scares people, that you really focus on, because it's the unknown. So
Yeah.
that kind of ties into that.
No, that's very true. That's very true. And I'm listening to Maps of Meaning, and he was going through some of that stuff, and I thought that's really fascinating how I had never kind of put that together that way. And I was like, oh yeah, that's really true. That's really
Hmm.
true. So interesting stuff.
Hmm.
So how does this intersect with your studies?
So I guess it's obviously more inclined towards philosophy, I guess,
Mhm.
in a lot of it, because I feel like really a lot of these issues that Peterson and Harris are talking about are really like, a lot of them are, I guess, I mean, definitely like scientific as well, but are moral and all that. But I think philosophy offers a good way of approaching this, because a lot of it is like a problem of framework. But also I was thinking about it in terms of like, politics or international relations and stuff, how to move forward. Is that because there's this one book that some professors at Seton Hall and actually at the UN helped co-author. It's called Crossing the Divide. So I've been reading that, and that's been talking about how like moving forward, different countries can better interact with each other. And it's interesting. I just felt like there's a lot of depth lacking in some of it. So I think like your views and Peterson and Harris, sort of like this debate is sort of like helping to shape, well, at least a better understanding of human nature and like how better to act. So obviously on the international scale, or really any scale, whether it's the local level with your friends, or with acquaintances or coworkers, or fellow students, or on the international level, I mean, these sort of conversations are important, because especially when like trying to understand other cultures, knowing that we're in our own framework becomes even more important, because obviously just from one individual to another in the same culture who like the same things can have vast differences. So if you're looking at people in different cultures, it can be like, because I've seen it on Seton Hall's campus. We have a lot of Chinese students, so there's a lot of like implicit things that a lot of Chinese students do just because that's the culture they're from.
That's right.
Because I did a study abroad in China and Japan 2 summers ago for a month each, and then 3 years ago, or 4 years ago now I'm losing track. I did a 2 weeks homestay where I had hosted a student for 2 weeks, and then I stayed with him for 2 weeks. So I've gotten some very personal interaction with like
Yeah.
that sort of cultural barrier, not just a language barrier to that of course too, but just sort of like being surprised at some things and getting used to this idea that like what some people do as normal to other people, they would never think of doing it. Or
That's right.
um, but almost like, I guess on a theoretical level, I feel like at least a lot of the stuff that I've read in like the international relations field needs to be more like supplemented with like people like Peterson or other people who like are more digging into the issues, rather than, it seems like a lot of the international relations field usually comes from a more left-leaning political spectrum, which tends to just assume these things like human rights and stuff. And I feel like Peterson really digs in, and he's like, well, why, this, questioning whether it's predicated in a sort of religious framework. And then that's interesting, because you look at like China doing their social media credit system, and the West is like, oh, well, that's not humane or whatever. And then it's like, well, what's their paradigm? What's ours? And it's like,
What's their social media credit system? Explain that to
um,
me.
So like I haven't read a lot about it, but basically they're now integrating the same where they keep track of everyone and like what you post online, and like you'll get a score, and if it's really low, then they can cut off like online services to you and public transport and stuff. So
Seriously? The
yeah,
government is making people post on Twitter and whatever
no.
social media.
Wait. Oh, it's not forcing you. I think I haven't read a lot into it. I'm thinking it's mainly just to stop political like bashing like politicians and stuff, like sort of form of political control where
Yeah.
uh what is it? Yeah, basically it's because they have a lot of issues with like if people like publicly bash the government or whatever,
Yeah.
like typically they've been pretty authoritarian where they'll arrest you and stuff.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
now this credit system, now it's basically like they're just making that more automized.
Interesting.
Yeah,
And
so
it's fascinating. And it's when you get to real world examples like this that you begin to ask questions about, okay, what's with our culture? And I think implicit in our culture, if you have kind of a fragile government that can't be criticized, that
mhm.
culturally for us expresses weakness.
That's
But
true.
I would imagine, I'm guessing that in China, perhaps allowing criticism appears as weak,
Oh yeah. That's actually pretty much right on the head. Because in a lot of Eastern cultures, well, I'm basing this just like in Japan and China because that's my main focus. But there's this idea in Japanese. It's called omote, but it's basically like the translation of that is like surface or frontlet. But it's like there's the idea of saving face.
Right,
So it's like you never want to do something to like disrespect in public.
right.
So like if you are to say something to someone that would be disrespectful in public, obviously you just will say it afterwards or in private or something. And that exists to some degree in the West, but not to the degree I think that it does in the East. Like obviously over here, like obviously you probably don't want to say something that like embarrass your friend in front of everyone, but like in the East, it's like on a different level where it's like integrated in different cultural ways that don't really exist here. Or if it does, it's pretty minimal.
And just the development of these things is fascinating. One of the, I did a talk with Peugeot and Greg Glyer about living overseas. And, when you're done with your degree, I mean, if you can find a way to live as long as you can in China or Japan, to just learn that language and learn that culture, that's a terrific way to spend your 20s and just learn, because you'll learn a lot.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
really deep down.
hmm Yeah, no, I'm actually planning on doing that because I'm graduating early this December. So
Okay.
I'm planning on applying for a few different jobs and programs, but there's one hosted by the Japanese government called the JET program, the Japanese English teaching program. So that's at least at minimum a 1-year contract to work and live in Japan and help with teaching English and stuff. So
Oh, that's
yeah, so
terrific.
that'd be cool. Yeah. But yeah, if not that, something, because I've been reading a lot actually on this one. I think the Buddhist sect it's Tibetan. It's from Tibetan. Well, it's an official Tibetan Buddhist sect or whatever. It's called like Aro Tagir or whatever. And this one guy, David Chapman, he has a few of his own websites. One of them is meaningless.com. And it's interesting because I've been reading his perspective, and he kind of comes at a perspective similar, well, not similar to you and Peterson, but sort of kind of a different way because he's coming from like this Buddhist perspective.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because he's framed a lot of the issues within this Buddhist framework. So like there's the idea, I don't know if you've heard of it, of like non-duality.
Yeah. That's I don't know much about it, but I've heard it. I've heard people put it forward.
Okay. Yeah, because it's interesting because he develops these different things, and he talks about how basically, he talks about the current situation. I don't know if it's the world or just the West. He doesn't specify, but sort of like the way we view meaning now is like it's fractured, like it's a bunch of little tiny bits. And you can see this as all the things, like there's with smartphones or the internet, there's always a billion things you could be doing. So it's almost like meaning is fragmented. And obviously this has had a lot of problems, but it's also interesting because he's distinguished between like, I guess 2 or 3 main types of how you can interpret meaning, and he calls it meaningness, the quality of having meaning or not. Because actually that term doesn't exist, even though meaninglessness exists. But
Right, meaningness. Huh.
Yeah, meaningless. But yeah, he talks about like eternalism, where it's like trying to fixate meaning. So people do this a lot. Everyone kind of does it, where it's like, in the sense he says in like theology, people fixate, God as being infinite, eternal.
Right.
But people can do that in other things. So you could fixate like meaning on material things. So you could say, well, money will always make me happy, or as long as I have this, I'll be happy, right? A physical thing, or and then he says obviously the opposite extreme of that is nihilism or nihilism, and then sort of like he's advocating for like a sort of what he calls like the complete stance, because he says there's a bunch of fragmented stances that he says it's like was it like the materialist stance? Obviously there's like hedonism and other things. He has different terms for it, but no, I found his perspective on these things very interesting.
Interesting. That is very interesting. Huh. So how do you find time to listen to videos when you're got this three-headed? I mean, it's really four, because Chinese and Japanese, by the way, are not the same language.
Yeah.
It's like just to learn one of them is insane.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of cheated because I had been starting to learn Japanese in high school.
Okay.
So I self-studied sophomore year, and then I took it my junior and senior years at the high school level.
Okay.
And then took the AP test, passed that, and then yeah. So by the time I was already coming to college, I was already like pretty good. So that I just kind of continued on that. Chinese I started brand new freshman year, so that was kind of a struggle. Which some of it still is a struggle, because at least Mandarin, it has 4 tones. So so for example, like if you're taking the syllable a, you could say ah, 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 and those are the 4 tones. So there's like the flat, there's the inflect rising, there's the up and down, and then there's the falling. And then Cantonese is even crazier, because that has like 8 tones or something. I'm like, yeah, I don't want to learn that.
Oh, wow.
But yeah.
Do you feel like robbed because you learned English in that prime window of language learning? And English isn't easy, but I would dare bet these languages are tougher to learn than English.
Yeah, I mean, I would say English, well, definitely English over Japanese, because I think actually in English learning Japanese is easier, because there's only 2 pronunciations that are different. There's this special RL sound in Japanese that doesn't exist in English. And like, the word tsunami has in Japanese, it's like it has like a special TSU sound that doesn't really exist in English. Like most people say tsunami, but it's tsunami. So it's, but other than that, that's it. But in Chinese, I say I'm not sure. I don't know. Maybe either or. Chinese or English would have been good to learn in early life, because
you learned English, so
So that's fine.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Illinois, in northwest suburbs from the city.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And how did you wind up in Seton Hall?
Yeah, so I was looking for like different programs related to international relations, and Seton Hall's pretty close to New York City, so there's been a lot of good opportunities out here related to that. So
that's terrific. That's terrific.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you want to do long term with this thing?
Long term, I'm still trying to figure that out, to be honest, because I mean, short term, it's like work and live in China or Japan or other places. Kind of like I guess I don't have a really long term plan, at least set in stone right now, because I kind of want to work and live in Japan or China just for a little bit to see if I like living there, and then make future plans, because I feel like I don't know, I'm not really fixated right now exactly. Like I have vague things. I kind of want to do research, or I don't know, something maybe sociological. I don't know, because I've been reading a lot of like Jonathan Haidt's stuff, and I really like a lot of his work. So I don't know if it'd be something like that, just like at least when I'm in Japan, I guess, or in China, I can like start doing some preliminary research, or interviewing people and stuff like that. But yeah, I'm not exactly sure right now.
Now, what about other students in Jordan Peterson? Do you find other students listening to Peterson? I mean, is he popular, and who's listening, and what are they thinking?
It's interesting. So I have talked to a few of my friends. It seems like, I mean, some people are interested, and then I don't know, I guess just not everyone has heard of him, but it's interesting. Like, I guess some of my friends, I just mentioned, it's like, oh yeah, it's Peterson. So I think generally there's like a positive vibe. I'm not exactly too sure because I forgot who was it. It was there was a controversy at some college with like a teaching assistant showing a Jordan Peterson clip, and
All
that
right,
was a whole.
Lindsay Shepherd.
Yeah, Lindsay Shepherd. Yeah, that was a whole like rabbit hole. So I'm not sure beyond students. I think in some of my papers I have referenced Jordan Peterson, so I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure how teachers or faculty feel, but yeah.
So what percentage of the people you hang out with know him, and do you ever talk about his stuff with other students?
Yeah, I would say maybe, I mean, of the people I hang out with frequently, maybe like half know about him.
Okay.
And then, yeah, I'll occasionally talk with people. I don't know, some of the friends I hang out with don't really like really dense topics. So it's trying to find someone who can, I can go on a, like they're like, oh no, like here he goes again. He's going to go on a rant forever because it's just like, I don't know, some of these topics obviously can get really long-winded. But,
And what aspect of Peterson are those who know him interested in?
I think from what I can assess, I guess his views just I think giving like a new breath of life on different perspectives, so like meaning and responsibility and stuff
Okay.
seems to be the main thing. Because I know there's like a Key to the Dawn, which is interesting because I know if you listen to him, he's like
Yeah. Yeah.
the musician. Yeah. No, I've listened to with him and other people. I've been getting into like the chill wave and that sort of like genre, and I think it's cool how he like remixes Peterson's things or
Yeah.
other people saying things into like a song. So
Yeah.
yeah, I guess there's a like a pop culture, I guess, in that too. But yeah,
Oh, that's interesting. That's
yeah,
interesting. Hmm. Well, Peterson's, Peterson, I just had a conversation with a guy, and part of the question was, where's Peterson going? Is he going to last? And this guy thought that, Peterson's going to continue to grow.
hmm
It'll be interesting, because the penetration on college campuses, marketers know this, that getting people young is key,
yeah,
because brain plasticity stops and you get stuck on things, and
yeah.
religions have known this for a long time too.
hmm
So to the degree that Peterson penetrates the campuses,
Yeah,
have you gone to any of his events?
I did go to the one. Let me think. I think it was like mid-June. Maybe it's June 17th to 18th. Actually in Wisconsin because I was back for the summer, and I was coming back too late to get the one in Chicago. So yeah, I went with my mom to the one in Wisconsin. It was like an hour drive away, hour and a half drive.
You
And
went
yeah,
with your mom. What'd your mom think?
she thought he was very interesting, but I know it's interesting. Yeah, because it was like, yeah, I think the theater there, I forgot the theater. It was pretty full. It was great, and like, he went over like a bunch of things about like the importance of writing well and like organizing your ideas well, and just a bunch of his other experiences like that. But it was really surreal seeing him in person. It was really no, it's strange though because it's like after like listening to his lectures and other things for like basically a year because I actually I think it was 2016 I started listening to him. Not a lot. When he exploded in 2017, I started listening to more, but I'd been exposed to him, I think from 2016 before Kathy Newman with the initial video with him like talking about pronouns and whatever. But yeah, no, it's been very interesting to see like all of this happen, and I don't know, it's kind of
So
crazy.
how did you run across him? Just the YouTube algorithm just bumped him up on your stream?
No, I think actually it was one of my friends, and no, he wasn't. I don't think he was my roommate at that time. But well, yeah, one of my friends was like, "Hey, you should watch this." And I was like, "Okay."
Interesting.
Yeah,
Interesting. Because this is, your descriptions here. This is marketing gold. This is what people who want to sell you stuff, that's what they long for. It's the word of mouth. The roommate giving you the link. It's like, click on this.
yeah. I mean, it might have been in my suggestions because I listened to a lot of like, well, there's like politically incorrect things, and that sort of like on the comedic side as like the reactionary humor against the more extreme left.
Okay.
So it might have been on my feed, but I didn't watch it until he had suggested. I mean, I don't remember seeing it, but until he suggested it. But
Well, it's very interesting to me, the way people find Peterson, and,
Mhm.
a lot of, because at our meetups, that's usually one of the things that we do. We kind of go around and and it's usually C16. Some people caught
Mm-hmm.
that. Joe Rogan, fair number of people
Mm-hmm.
found him through Joe Rogan,
Mm-hmm.
and then word of mouth, and colleges are like this, this network that gets created,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and it becomes almost a hive mind, and then that hive mind goes out into the world,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
and
definitely.
you're going way out into the world to
Yeah,
the other
not to,
side of the world,
yeah,
which I
not
which
to,
I think is
not to,
which I again I think is terrific. And
mm-hmm.
there are a few ways to better prepare yourself for almost anything
Mm-hmm.
than to go and live in another culture,
Yeah.
because otherwise, if you only know one culture, you tend to be its prisoner.
Yeah, 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 yeah. One of my friends is actually they're doing research on language and identity, and that's very interesting for me because, well, my thesis I'm specifically focusing on Peterson, uh, Jonathan Haidt, and Carl Jung. But specifically, I hadn't really considered too much. I talk with my friend on this a lot on how language affects identity, and obviously there's like the catchism, like to learn a second language is to have a second soul or whatever, but there's actually a lot of research coming out to back that, or at least some that supports that claim that like literally, I don't know if it was like, oh yeah, the way you think in one language is like, it's different. And I don't know the explicit literature, so I wasn't exactly sure, but I felt that like if I think or speak in Japanese, it's just the way the language is set up is inhibited or like structured in such a way that like you're just naturally probably more polite because that's just how the language is built
Yep.
and like
Yep.
how people speak. So
Yep.
that's the cultural language aspect.
Yep.
So it's like when I think in Japanese, it's just a different mode almost.
Yep.
Which is actually, I feel from my perspective, being raised, as American, I feel like it's more constrictive. It's almost like, because if I think in Japanese, especially like if I'm interacting with other Japanese people, then I'm already thinking about, well, am I going to say this the right way so that I'm properly polite and all that. That doesn't really cross my mind too much in English ever. I mean, obviously, like if it's a professor, like call them professor or doctor or whatever, but like, yeah, I don't know. It's interesting.
Well, even so, I had to learn Spanish, and I worked in Spanish for a number of years.
Mm-hmm.
And Spanish continues, as with many Latin language, you have the formal and then the informal. And
Mm-hmm.
so for a while, one of my daughters got into watching Korean soap operas, and so
Oh,
kind of begged them on my wife and I. So we started watching some Korean soap operas, and I
mm-hmm.
found that fascinating. I have a fair amount of contact with Koreans in my work because Korean immigrants, a number of Korean immigrants have come into the Christian Reformed Church. It's about 1/10 of our denomination. So out
Okay.
here on the West Coast, when I start helping out other groups,
Mm-hmm.
often they are Korean groups. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm fascinated by the culture. And I picked up on a Korean soap opera how, the form of the language you use to address someone who is older than you
Mm-hmm.
is
Mm-hmm.
different from someone who is younger than you.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And I
That's the
just
same in
thought,
Japanese. Yeah,
is it really?
yeah, yeah. It's the same. Yeah.
Wow. And I just thought, how does that, it's these subtle things that really have a cumulative effect in a culture.
Mm-hmm.
And our culture is so dismissive of
Mm.
age.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. The
Whereas,
West for sure.
just so
It's
dismissive of age, but in the
yeah.
East,
It's the
so
opposite. It's the opposite kind
yeah.
of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what's the cumulative impact of that over
Mm-hmm.
population and generation?
Mm.
And I remember when I moved here to Sacramento, the church, there was some developers that had come into possession of the property just next to us, and they were
Mm-hmm.
quite interested in buying the church property because then they would have had the whole frontage of the whole block.
Okay.
And I remember talking to one of the members of the church that had worked with these individuals. He was a lawyer and worked in real estate. And he
Mm-hmm.
said, you have to remember that these Chinese families, this was a Chinese family that owned this property. These
Mm-hmm.
Chinese families think very long term. And they're not just thinking, we Americans are looking to cut a deal and get our best deal out of it now, but these Chinese are thinking generationally. And I saw the Crazy Rich Asian movie. That's
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I might be watching that later this week.
yeah, and watching that movie, it's like on one hand, it was a very American movie in that,
Mm-hmm.
oh, okay, you're just dismissing centuries and Chinese
Yeah,
culture. is cohesive historically to a degree that most of us coming out of the blender of Western Europe just have no concept of.
Yeah,
And
100
this
years,
movie's
150
like, oh, now we're all going to become expressive individualists. Won't that be fun? And it's like, you really think that culture is going to give up so easily? I doubt it.
Yeah, there's a few sleeping dragons there.
That's right. I've watched these Koreans, and you know, and then the Koreans come to America, and the first generation immigrants, you know, they're continuing the tradition, and their churches are strong, and their communities are cohesive, and their families are cohesive. But then the children born here that go to school, and it's like,
yeah, they're used to this culture now.
Yeah. And Scott, you know who Scott Alexander is?
I don't.
He writes a blog, Slate Star Codex. I've gotten that wrong, but he does a fair amount of writing sometimes on, I think he's got one of his blogs was How the West Was Won or something like that. And he talks about universal culture. And, you know, sometimes we call that Western culture. He says it really isn't Western culture. It's universal culture. Why do Coca-Cola and McDonald's just kind of creep into a place? And then, of course, there's some cultural assimilation, but interesting stuff. Now you said your thesis, are you actually doing some work on Peterson and Jung and Haidt for a paper or something?
So far it's just been like reading Peterson's book, Maps of Meaning, and Haidt's. Well, I'd finished Haidt's book, The Righteous Mind, which is very interesting, and then reading some of Jung's works. I'm not going to be able to read all of it in this time frame. I finished like the heavy tome that was the archetypes in the collective unconscious over the summer, and then I don't know. I might be able to read Haidt's other book, The Coddling of the American Mind. But basically, it's going to be an attempt for me to reconcile my understanding of all these individuals and then try and kind of come to maybe a distillation of what can be said given these individuals' views. But I don't know. It's more, I guess, I think I was viewing it as a project now to like get something built and then come back to it later. Because I feel like obviously these ideas and stuff are so heavy. I don't think because I don't think I'll be like, I'm just gonna like solve everything in a few months or even a year. So but no, basically just I guess like a comprehensive take at trying to summarize, give justice to what I think their views are, and then trying to give justice to that, and then make connections and see if they disagree in areas.
Rather than Haidt's coddling book, I would recommend I haven't read the Coddling book yet. I've just started it, but the Happiness Hypothesis, which was Haidt's first big book, and especially given your concentration on a lot of these Far East studies, because in the Happiness Hypothesis, Haidt basically is trying to synthesize ancient wisdom traditions with his taste buds of moral.
The moral taste buds.
And so that's I read Happiness Hypothesis a number of years ago, and I found it to be a good book. It was a helpful book, and you know, kind of like, nobody has a Maps of Meaning. It's a tortured book. That's the best word I have for that
tortured.
Book. And Jordan Peterson was working out his salvation in fear and trembling. And Jung.
Fear and trembling.
You know, I haven't really attempted to read one of Jung's bigger books yet. But Happiness Hypothesis, I think you would probably find helpful and likely productive. You know, the intersectionality, of course, there's a lot of Jung in Peterson. So, I mean, reading those two is kind of like this, and Haidt is over to the side. Haidt is he's not as squirrely. I mean, Peterson and Jung I don't know if squirrely is the right word for Jung, and just me saying that will offend some people, I know, but because Jung is a religious figure. I mean, there is a
Oh no,
there
definitely.
there is a
Yeah.
religious community that Jung's work has
Yeah.
spawned. Haidt is more kind of your well-mannered, courteous,
Mhm.
academic who and public intellectual who, if you put a mic in front of him, he'll say coherent things nicely. He'll
Mhm.
challenge things, but he'll do it nicely. And of course, Peterson
Mhm.
is
Oh
kind of
yeah.
a wild man.
Yeah. No. I read Carl Jung's autobiography over the summer, and it
Yep.
was crazy. And
Yeah.
I finished it over the summer. I had started reading it last semester, and I actually wrote a paper comparing Kierkegaard and Jung on.
Ooh, interesting.
It was on. I don't know if I sent it to you. I may have
Oh,
emailed
you
it to you.
might have.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it
Yeah.
was my final paper for the class on Kierkegaard's. It was like ethics, religion, and postmodernity.
Yep. Yep.
Uh,
Yep.
and yeah, that paper I was talking about how kind of Jung's individuation was innately like both a psychological and religious process. I think is what I said, where it's sort of like there's like this element of, well, psychological in the sense that you need to be like smart about it, you need to like, willfully do this, but then there's like this religious element where you're kind of at the whims of, well, the forces beyond, I guess, right? So
Right.
it's sort of like the cultural forces, or you could say the gods, or God has to smile down on you, or otherwise it's kind of game over. I guess the idea of grace might be similar, because it's sort of like there's such powerful forces that to think, kind of think, oh, I can change myself. That's just being kind of arrogant and kind of just being in the realm of just the psychological. But then the religious element is being in that like humble state almost. And Jung talked about that in his autobiography, because he was like, well, he talked about how he had a few like religious visions almost that really like were super powerful. So he had a very like intimate religious experiences. So I mentioned that, and I mentioned how Jung had this good distinction where when he was doing scientific work, he wouldn't project, well, I would say project his metaphysical or religious beliefs. So he wouldn't say, well, God is this. He would use the term God image to say like, as because in a scientist he knew he couldn't empirically prove God. So he said like, we can, however, prove that so many like many people believe in God. So
Right.
there's this image of God, right? Like, not to say that I can prove it. I think in his personal life, I mean, I don't know, like maybe he wrote in his journal, I don't believe in God or whatever, but I think from his autobiography, it's assumable that he believed in God. I mean, to him, it was just very obvious that God exists. I mean, in his way of interpretation, but
Right. As we've seen in the Peterson Harris thing, I mean, a really kind of lousy question. It's not lousy, but I mean, the question, Peterson is right to push back on this. Do you believe in God? And people I know get irritated that Peterson won't give them the binary response they're looking
yeah,
for.
a yes or no, yeah.
Right. Because Peterson, well, what do you mean by God? That's a far more interesting question, because the question is not, as Peterson says, it's not self-evident. Well, what God are you talking about? And now you can then, you see, as a pastor, you get to play games and say, what do you mean, like Marduk? And if I say that to someone, people will, well,
Yeah, yeah,
who's
yeah,
Marduk? Or,
yeah, or the
but
flying spaghetti monster.
right. So what
Yeah.
what does God mean to you? And then people then step back, but don't we even I was thinking the other day about the fact that we have this, the fact that we use this word God so transactionally. And this is an old thing, because if you read Hebrew, you've got Elohim, you've got El.
Yeah.
So they even had kind of a transactional word. You have it in Greek, hotheos, and in English we usually drop the definite article, but in New Testament it's almost always the God in Greek. And so we have this transactional word God, but now in our culture, because God has such negative associations in some
Oh
sectors,
yeah.
that people say the universe. And it's like,
Yeah, the universe. Yeah. But that's like I don't know if that's called naturalism, but no, I'm actually taking a course this semester on David Hume,
yeah,
and we're just focusing on his dialogues concerning natural religion. which is very fascinating. So
Yeah.
just that book alone has like 20 different ways or 30, 40 different ways you can view God. So yeah, no, I think Peterson's totally justified. I think most people who are like, whatever, they just haven't thought about it very much, or so ingrained in this paradigm of thinking that God can only mean the Abrahamic faith traditional sense, which is just go to another country. Yeah, it's not going to be this. Well, maybe another European country, no. But I mean, my experience in Japan, like I went to like the Shinto shrine and the Buddhist shrine, and that's like, I mean, it's definitely not Abrahamic, not at all. So it's a very different way of thinking. I guess in our language, it'd be, I guess, considered more paganistic. Because in Shintoism, there's many different. It's almost like animism. It's like a evolved form of animism where not necessarily everything is spirit or whatever, or has a spirit, but like every living thing has a spirit. So like trees, there can be like maybe like if it's the biggest, oldest tree in the forest, maybe that's like the god of the forest or spirit of that forest. Or I think usually though they build shrines around or near wherever like what they would consider maybe that spiritual source to be.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, but I think you're right. So in the West, when we say God, there's all of this stuff underneath it that has come into it. And so when I, was listening to Peterson and Harris and came up with God 1 and God 2, in some ways, and Sam can't recognize God 1. And it's like, well, gosh, do you read anything ancient from the West? Because, or even from the Near East? Because just the way we talk exhibits this God. And of course, God 2, which is the agent and the person. But so I thought Peterson handled that part of the debate beautifully. But I think I don't think Harris is in a position where he can concede anything, which makes him an uninteresting conversation partner in there.
Yeah, no, because actually we just finished the dialogues with Hume just this last class, and he ends it basically saying how the difference between what he distinguishes between like a like I think it was like a dogmatic believer and a hypocritical atheist is semantics. So it's actually the implicit thing is the same for both of them. They're just not willing to concede in the word game. So that's why I think in the East it's really clever, at least with like Taoism, is that you're actually you can't talk about it. You can't say it in that sense, because I mean, at least implicitly, it seemed like Taoism is very aware that you run into these problems where people are like, well, I don't believe that. Well, what do you mean by that? And that's the whole problem. But if you say, well, let's just agree, we can't agree on how to define that. Okay. Well, you can obviously like make guideposts and wayposts to try and get closer to what that seems to be, or which I think is like the work of theology, religion, and maybe philosophy. But to say absolutely this is that, I think that's like the dogmatic believer that Hume critiques, where they just blindly says, well, I have faith. Well, the problem of faith without reason is that, well, you could have faith for anything, right? You could just be taken in by a charlatan who wants to con you out of everything, and well, you have faith in him, but I mean, it's kind of on a bad foundation. I don't know.
Well, and that's right. I mean, and to a certain degree, the language game, what you mean, and in religious communities, so to affirm the profession of your religious community. All right. So what are you doing with that profession? Well, in a sense, you're affirming your place within the community. And, as long as you're not being disingenuous, this lines up then with who you are in that community. And now as a group of people, you actually have orientation and you have cohesion. And as Jonathan Haidt points out, that is a powerful, powerful thing. And people will naturally do that. And where we've sort of arrived in the West is this: we have these pseudo religions out there that people, well, they watched It's a Wonderful Life, and so every time a bell rings, an angel gets wings, and that becomes part of their, some screenwriter who plucked this up. Well, here we go, and we got to do a little bit of mythology here. Ding, ding, ding. Clarence has his wings,
Yeah.
And so then in a culture, people start to construct this. And of course,
Mm.
celebrity atheists will look at that and say, everything is just that construction. And you say, well, those constructions are certainly around,
Mm-hmm.
but you don't really know that everything is that construction. You're just, you want it to be that way because you've got your own construction over here you're promoting. So, and we'll agree with them. Okay, well, let's use reason as a coherence, a consistency checking tool to see, to talk about this. And but then you get into the sociological layer. I mean, let's have this conversation like civil human beings, and let's really listen to each other, and let's see if you're actually moving towards having some openness to new ideas, we'll be open to each other, and that makes the conversation more fun. And but this is, there are levels of incredible complexity to this whole thing that we have so adapted and learned implicitly, can hardly articulate it, that we can actually play these games together. And it's a really wild thing.
Yeah, going off of that, it seems like kind of what you were talking about, and with Jonathan Haidt and Carl Jung, actually, there's this idea of what he calls, what Jung calls the archetypes. And now evolutionary psychology seems very similar to what they call modules. Or I think Haidt in The Righteous Mind said it was like innately prepared idea, or maybe I'm getting the exact term wrong, but it's something like that. It's basically, from birth, or it's just sort of like an instinct or something. And have you read about like Haidt's idea of modularity, or like modules? He talked about it. Wait, did you say you read The Righteous Mind, or you haven't?
I did read The Righteous Mind, but that was a few years ago, and so it's not ringing a bell. I probably read it and forgot it, never learned it.
Okay. Yeah. No, he talks about it. Obviously, there's like the elephant and the rider.
Right.
But that's like the first metaphor, that we're intuitive. That goes into a social intuitionism.
Yep.
But his second main idea is the moral foundations theory.
Yep.
So like basically there's like fairness, fairness,
yep.
Authority, liberty, something else. And then so those are like the modules. Those are
okay. Yep.
Yeah, that's what he's saying are like the innately prepared ideas. So like based on how you're raised, based on what actions you choose to do, those can change, right? To a degree, but it seemed very similar to me to Carl Jung's idea of the archetypes. And then I was wondering, when Jonathan Haidt was talking about these modules, it feels to me like Haidt is taking a very sociological approach, or behaviorist approach, where he's saying like, this is what it seems to be. This is how we can categorize them in a useful, sort of detached sense. It seems like Carl Jung is saying like, what are these things as we experience them? And I don't know if that's when he's talking about the archetypes and the images, and like, in dreams you'll see these demons or angels or mythical figures as maybe unconscious emissaries or representations of the modules that like Haidt is talking about. Like sort of like how we can see these modules represented in a metaphoric form. Like as, like if you look at demons or angels, like the representations maybe of the absolute vices or virtues of these forms, right? So like the forever giving angel or benevolent angel would be like the ultimate virtue of the caring foundation or module or whatever. I don't know if that's it. I mean, that's one of the things
But that's an interesting question, to try and relate the archetypes to these modules. That's a very interesting question. Well, we're about out of time. So any last licks you wanted to get in, or?
I don't know. Nothing's coming to mind right now. I think in my original thing, what was it? I wanted to talk about. I think it was like phenomenology, or whatever, because it's interesting. What was it? Well, there's been a few visiting professors who talked on like phenomenology, and that as a basis for as a different way of viewing, I guess, religious experience or whatever.
Yep.
Like, I guess maybe briefly I could talk on my own religious background. I don't know. It's kind of it'd probably be too long for this time frame, but I don't know. Would that be okay, I guess?
Yeah, we got about 5 minutes, and it gives me a break until the next conversation. So on Monday afternoons, I kind of line them up.
Okay. So yeah, I guess I'll start out. I was raised in the Mormon faith.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So yeah, so basically that was pretty interesting. My experience with that, has sort of been my, I guess, undertone a lot of my religious experiences. It felt like a lot of people in the Mormon faith or whatever are like really good people, and there's a lot of good teachings. But I guess there's a lot of hypocrisy. I mean, I guess in a lot of religions there are. I mean, obviously,
To be a human being is to be a hypocrite. It's pretty much part of the package.
yeah. I mean, that wasn't my main issues, I guess, with the religion, is that it was theologically or philosophically kind of, well, to me, from what I found, bankrupt. Like there wasn't a lot there when I pushed. So I was like, pushing on the questions of what they said God was like or all this stuff, then just kind of fell apart, at least for me. And then I went through. It's interesting because I went through sort of, maybe a lot of people are still in this state or whatever, like being like an angry atheist, where now because I thought Mormonism was wrong and at least theologically, philosophically bad, then well, all religion's bad. And I kind of bought into like the Richard Dawkins, like what was it, like what did he write, like the selfish gene, and
Yeah.
he wrote something on God as well. I'm forgetting it right now, but I kind of bought into that. So that's why when I'm reading Hate now, it's very interesting because he's describing the new atheists, and I have this like personal, like I was there, like sympathizing with them, like now like 6 or 7 years ago, and then kind of like that faded away, and now I'm like, I guess, an agnostic or whatever. I don't know. I don't really subscribe to anything. I don't know, but
the difficulty with the difficulty with the LDS faith is that it's so new. Now they want to make the argument that it's a
renovation, like a
renovation of Christianity, but to the degree that I understand it, it's a pretty radical renovation, and it's that you have the question, okay, if it's a renovation, how well will it stand up to scrutiny with respect to a lot of the other testing that's been done on the Old and New Testament, the canonical Bible, that's happened over the centuries. And what happened, in upstate New York at the time that the LDS formed and the Jehovah's Witness formed, it was a millennial age in this burned over area, and just whole groups of religions that had similar traits kind of grew out of that area. But I personally have a lot of respect, and I live in California, so there's in the West, the Mormon population. I didn't know many LDS people when I grew up out east, but came west. Obviously, they're all over. Even
Utah.
a poor homeless addict that used to sleep literally against my door for 5 years here. He was, he was a deeply religious Mormon, and that's hard to do if you're also a terribly if you're a really brutal alcoholic and drug user. But I at the same time a lot of respect for the community, how the values that they hold, the way that they keep their families together, and I have tremendous respect for the Mormon community and how they live, and so it's an interest. To me, it's a very interesting study in religion. The particular turns they've made. Now, one of the guiding lights of my denomination, Richard Mao, who was a philosophy teacher at Calvin College, went on to become the president of Fuller Seminary. He reached out and built a lot of good connections to academics in the Mormon community. Took a lot of heat from that from evangelicals. They were being too soft. What you're going to be jerks to these people? That helps what cause exactly? But he's had a lot of very interesting conversations with other LDS academics at Brigham Young and some of the other colleges. So it's to me it's a fascinating faith. I'm actually quite interested in it, and and the way the particular turns that they took with respect to, because Christianity has this huge history, and here this sect comes out and they make particular turns, and they in a sense want a degree of respect from Christians for them, but also want the liberty to kind of carve out their own trail. And the couple of times I visited Salt Lake City and went down to the temple and the museum and all of that,
Mhm.
my impression was this is like the most American of all religions within this certain ethos.
Yeah, yeah.
Pioneering and fascinating religion
Yeah,
to me. So
yeah.
interesting.
Mhm.
But thanks for sharing that. Yeah, we are about out of time. So if we talk
Okay.
again, maybe we can go further
Yeah,
into
yeah, yeah.
that, because
Yeah, for sure.
it's a fascinating religion. And now on the top
Mhm.
of it, now your studies of Chinese and
Yeah.
Japanese.
Yeah, yeah. I have a few frameworks that it's interesting. Yeah, because my religious framework typically is in that. So the
Yeah,
traditional Christian framework with like the Trinity and stuff is actually like it's like a new idea to me rather than being like, oh, that's just.
right.
So it's interesting because then I'm like coming kind of as an outsider, kind of not because I'm still raised in this culture, but I don't know.
Fascinating. Well, it's great talking to you,
Yeah, it's
Trevor.
good talking with you, Paul. Yep.
And study hard and
Mhm.
do well.
Yep. Thank you
Take
again.
care.
Have a good night.
Yep. Bye-bye.